With your host, Andrew Donaldson. This is Heard Tell.
Welcome back to Heard Tell. Okay, he's our election expert because he's an expert in elections, and he's self-made, did it that way. Part of our friends over at elections-daily.com, along with some other folks over there that we see frequently on the program. Joe Szymanski, how are you, sir?
Oh, I'm doing very well. It's a rainy day here in central Pennsylvania, but I'm doing very well today, Andrew. Thanks for having me on.
Does that have anything to do with the poll numbers that are now out about the races, especially for governor and senator in Pennsylvania? Because those look a little grim and gloomy if you're the GOP, don't they?
They do right now, but, I think as we've lived and learned from not only the 2020 elections, but from Virginia in 2021, you don't really see those polls kind of materialize what people are feeling until August when these campaigns really ramp up. So, these early summer polls, they're a good data point, but taken with a grain of salt for right now. August is when you really start to see the numbers start piling up.
Now, I'll push on that one just for the point of discussion. The pushback on that one is Glenn Youngkin was relatively unknown outside of Virginia. In Virginia, probably relatively unknown. He built his brand and identity through that race and won that race. That's not what we got in the Senate here. We got Oz, who has all kinds of negatives and a well-established background. So the opinions on him are kind of baked into the cake. You've done this a while. You do the numbers. Does he have movement numbers in the poll to make up? This looks like it's going to be a 2 to 5 point race somewhere in there all the way around back and forth. Does he have movement in the polls to get those kind of numbers?
I think he, the thing with Oz is that he just got to get his approvals with our Republicans up. Obviously it was a very, very long and hard and heavy primary in Pennsylvania for that Senate race. Obviously, he took a lot of hits, not only from Team McCormick, but from Team Barnett, that he was not, and especially from Team Barnett, that he was not Republican enough. That was a question that followed him the whole time. And it'll be very interesting to see, kind of how that develops here. But I think that is something he can make up, though, is that fact that he can still, I think, build that back up with Republicans and kind of build up that approval rating back up there as they kind of meet both candidates. I think, again, that's what he needs to do. It's not even just what he could do. This is a what he needs to do type of option.
Now, I'll admit we all have our biases. We're grown folk talk here on Heard Tell. I have biases, so I'll just put it out there. I would not vote for him. I don't like the Turkey stuff. I don't like the Erdogan stuff. But I follow a lot of foreign policy. I know about these things. I study those things. The mood in the Republican Party is not towards foreign policy right now. There's definitely an isolationist tilt, especially in the Trump and MAGA wings of the party. Is that going to hurt him or not? It's a deal breaker for me, but that's my own personal biases. You tell me, is that going to play at all in this race for a U.S. Senate seat?
I think it could. I think it very much depends on how Team Fetterman tries to go after him for it. Like you said, didn't really play all that much in the Republican primary. I think in a general election, though, obviously it's a much different atmosphere. It'll be very interesting to see kind of how that atmosphere, how that part of his life and how that part will translate into the campaign. Now, the general election, where that might be a little bit more upsetting maybe to some swing voters, especially in those collar counties, if this is an attack that the Fetterman campaign decides to hone in on.
One more quick thing, since you mentioned it. Fetterman had the health scare, went through that. Kind of hard to tell how that, a lot of people are like, oh, this dude. I was like, well, no, that Fetterman's a different kind of cat to start with. I think that would probably be a sympathetic for his base to him, like, oh, he's overcome this. I think it actually kind of humanizes a guy who's kind of, and I don't mean this even in a bad way. He's just kind of a weird dude. He's just different. I think something like the health scare might actually humanize him and help him with voters, but that's my opinion. What do you think? The health scare and coming out, he's up in the polls right now, which he probably should be with some of the built-in things he's going to have. The health scare and his performance going forward, what do you see happening there?
It might depend on when we start seeing him on the campaign trail again. If we get, I think August is kind of that big month when we're talking about general election campaigns. If he's not really back on the campaign trail full time in August, that's when these questions will start popping up again. Obviously, heart issues are nothing to be, nothing to not be concerned about. That's for sure. And I think there is potentially an issue here with the fact that he didn't let anyone know about it. I don't think even people in Harrisburg knew about it. Because the fact is he was diagnosed with it before he became lieutenant governor in Pennsylvania. So it's something, again, it's kind of like the Oz and Turkey thing. It depends on how it is, brought on to, and it depends on, kind of how the Oz team then kind of decides to forewarn it. Because again, the health issues are something that, if they're attacked in the wrong way, can certainly backfire very, very quickly. If that's something you decide to attack on, those are attacks that can backfire very, very quickly.
Yeah, and real quick, the governor's race, Mastriano is down a little bit right now. On paper, this looks like a candidate on paper, this looks like a candidate that is going to be all kinds of problems for the GOP. I think this is them shooting themselves in the foot a little bit on a winnable race, but last few years have been weird. You never say never. I'm open-minded on it. Mastriano, he's not getting trucked or anything. He's down a little bit, but they've also got a thick oppo file on this guy. Did the Republicans blow this one?
I think it's very possible. I mean, I've always stated my concerns about Mastriano. I don't think he's a guy who can moderate. I don't think he's a guy who can move away from what drove him to kind of this fame, and that is in a large part due to him very much pushing the nonsense that is the idea that there was fraud in the 2020 election. He was a big factor in that. And the fact is he the money game, which are big in governor's races, especially in governor's races, that's key. This is a guy who's going to get romped by Shapiro, and not by just, the Clinton Trump numbers, where that doesn't really matter, especially in presidential elections, because there's kind of a peak where money matters in presidential elections. But in governor elections, money matters a lot when you've got a guy who has $13.5 million in hand for Josh Shapiro, and a guy who we believe has around 400,000 in hand in Doug Mastriano right now going into the summer months. That's a legitimate problem, I think, for Republicans. And that's, I think, been an underrated concern, is the fact that Mastriano is not a guy who has connections necessarily to raise money right now. And he might not be a guy who the Republican Governors Association might want to spend money on, even if it's, even if polls are showing a 4 or 5 point race. He might be a problem that the RGA does not want to spend money on and not save him in that regard.
Yeah, in Pennsylvania, you know this well, there is some major media markets. You got money. If you got a money advantage, you can flood a chunk of the electorate in the fall, especially places like Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and the Lehigh Valley, places that you really got to win a statewide race. Money doesn't usually show up other than in news items until about, August, September. I think he's just going to get buried in bad stuff running up to the end of this, and then that'll be that, and it'll be 5 to 10 points. Am I wrong there?
I think that is certainly a very possible option. This is something that I always try and inspire when we're talking about governor's races, that even in wavier elections, governor races have been shown to be kind of like this brick wall towards the waves. They seem to certainly have these governor races certainly seem to have much more focus on local issues. I mean, if you go back to 2018, obviously federally, Arizona and Texas were very competitive races, but they're gubernatorial races. Doug Ducey of Arizona and Greg Abbott of Texas soared to re-elections by over 15 points in both of their races in 2018. Beating an incumbent governor or beating a party where the current governor may be retiring but is popular, it's hard to do. Even in wave years, Republicans are learning that in Michigan. I think Democrats are going to learn. They learned that in Texas and Arizona in 2018. I think Republicans are going to learn that in Michigan, and I think they're going to learn in a couple other places as well this year that being an incumbent governor is much easier said than done, even in wave year elections.
Yep. Let's start running through some of these primaries. Joe Szymanski from Elections-Daily joining us. By the way, some guy that runs an elections website might want to do a piece on how the American populace and electorate tends to like to kind of put themselves bulwarks up. They like to split Congress. They like to split governors from their races. There's some historical trends to that. It might be interesting for somebody who knows a lot about elections to look into one of these days for a written piece. Hint, hint. We've had some notable primaries things. Let's go down to Alabama. Mo Brooks, bless his little heart, what there is of one. He got trucked by 30 points in the end. He was endorsed by Trump. He was unendorsed by Trump. Katie Britt on paper is what you would normally call a normal GOP senatorial candidate. She's also young. I think she's mid-40s, late 40s.
Only 40. She's only just turned 40, apparently.
Oh my God. I mean, she could be in the Senate for 40 years. She's that kind of a candidate. But then Trump got involved. It looks like it shook itself out the way we kind of started. And Mo Brooks is now saying he's going to end his political career. I'll believe that when I see it. But anyway, just real quick on that one, because Trump got involved, people were watching it. We had the circus around it. Talk a little Alabama real quick. Also Governor Kay Ivey and all that mess.
Well, yeah, I mean, Alabama was probably maybe the most roller coaster GOP Senate primary yet in terms of kind of the outside influences on it. Obviously, Donald Trump originally endorsed Mo Brooks very, very early on in this race. It was a very early nomination, one of his first. Actually, this was basically a reward to Brooks, basically because, again, Brooks was one of the frontliners in Congress with the nonsense around the 2020 election again, and again, the pushing of the belief that there was voter fraud in some way. If you look at that, Brooks was the guy behind that, and Trump decided to reward him with a very early endorsement. That did not stop, however, Katie Britt, who was backed by Richard Shelby. She was Richard Shelby's former chief of staff. This is Richard Shelby's sheet. He's a very influential and popular guy in Alabama politics. I never counted him out. And Brooks has always had questions around him campaign-wise. He comes from Huntsville, which Alabama hasn't elected a statewide official from Huntsville or that northern part of the state since the 1970s. So there's kind of been this curse around the Huntsville area since then, that because it's kind of this lesser populated area, it doesn't necessarily culturally mesh in with the other parts of the state. That those candidates from there have issues reaching out to the broader and wider base away from the area. And Brooks, I think, certainly dealt with that. Obviously, he was unendorsed by Trump as his polling numbers continue to flounder, even with the Trump endorsement. Trump unendorsed him, kind of gave some nonsense reasoning for it. Again, that was mostly surrounding the 2020 stuff. But Trump endorsed Katie Britt about a week before this recent runoff. Britt was already up pretty heavily in the polls. All it did was basically confirm that Britt was going to be the nominee at this point, and obviously Tuesday night happened. Pretty easy victory for Britt, as we expected. It was called pretty early on in the night for that runoff, and Mo Brooks, as you said, we'll see if he sticks to it, but he is in his mid-60s at this point. It sounds like Brooks is going to be taking a forever break from politics right now, and he seems to be retiring within Huntsville from politics for a good period of time.
There's something with Mo Brooks I can get behind and endorse. May he enjoy his grandchildren outside of elective office, and God bless him doing so, because it's time to go, Mo. Bye-bye. Our good friend Joe Szymanski from elections-daily.com. We're going to run through a bunch more of these primaries. We're also going to look at, we got some real big ticket ones coming up. Arizona is going to be an absolute gang fight out there. A couple other ones. Joe Szymanski, Elections Daily, our good friend and election expert. Right after this, Hard Tell continues. Welcome back to Herd Tell. Joe Szymanski, our good friend, elections-daily.com. If you have not found their website yet, a bunch of folks that said, hey, we can cover elections better than we've seen. They've went out and done it. They're big time now. They're combined and partnered with Decision Desk. Make sure you're following. They also do live streams on elections night that are always entertaining. Good folks. Make sure you're following them. You can see his social media there on the lower third graphic. All right, buddy, let's talk through a couple of real quick ones. A race that not a lot of national coverage, but you know it because you're there, because you're one of these seemingly endless string of George Mason grads that we've got to deal with on the program. Virginia, there was a House runoff election. Didn't get a lot of national coverage, but it's kind of tied into Glenn Youngkin. It's almost like the bookend of the Glenn Youngkin story. Just walk people through that real quick for them.
Yeah, so obviously Virginia had their last remaining House primaries on Tuesday night. The thing with Virginia is that congressional committees, basically the district committees, can choose whether they want to hold a primary, whether they want to hold a convention. In Republicans, a convention method is still very popular in some regards. The Northern Virginia-based districts, the 11th, the 8th, and the 10th all held conventions, as well as the 5th congressional district. And with that, because there were no competition for the for the 9th and the 4th congressional district, that left only 4 contested primaries on Tuesday night, the 6th, the 3rd, the 2nd, and the 7th, in terms of Republicans. And Democrats actually had no contested primaries. They had no big primaries this year. Don Beyer did get a primary challenge this year, but did not end up doing anything. He won in a 78-22 re-election bid. But Republican side had more interesting. They had two key races, of course, in those two key seats, the 2nd and the 7th. These are going to be two very key congressional races in Virginia in 2022. The 2nd is a Biden +2 seat based around Virginia Beach City, while the 7th is a Biden +7 seat based around Nova, exurbs, and suburbs, mainly in Stafford and Spotsylvania counties, and then going out to some parts of Central Virginia. So it's two very interesting seats here. Republicans in the 2nd district. It was expected that they would nominate Jen Kiggins by a pretty heavy amount. She's a current state senator from the Virginia Beach area. That's what she did. She won about 56% of that primary vote. Her closest competitor, Jerome Bell, who was a very right-wing individual from the Virginia Beach area, got about 26% of the vote then. So again, Kiggins won by about 30 points in that regard. Unsurprising on the night. The real interesting race ended up being the 7th congressional district race. Yesli Vega ended up being the nominee there. She's a current supervisor from Prince William County. That's what drove her to victory. She won about 26. She got about a 2,600 vote margin from that part of Prince William that's in the district. She won by about 2,000 district wide in the primary. So that's really what drove her victory. There's that home base race there, as she ran against Derek Anderson, former Green Beret from the Stafford, Spotsylvania area. Came in 2nd place, while State Senator Bryce Reeves, who represents parts of those central Virginia counties and parts of Spotsylvania, came in a surprisingly weak 3rd. It was an interesting race. It was the one to watch. Vega came out on top. She's a very interesting candidate. Only 36-year-old, is a former deputy sheriff, supervisor elected in a swing Prince William supervisor's base seat, and is also Hispanic and is the daughter of El Salvadoran immigrants. So it's going to be very interesting to kind of see how she dynamically plays in this race. This is about a Youngkin +5 seat when he won statewide in 2021. So it's a race that could be tilting just on even Republican tilting, depending on how this environment comes down to in 2022 when we get to November. So it's going to be very interesting to see right now. In the 2nd, we currently have that rated as a leans Republican flip. Actually, this is one of those areas where Republicans probably got one of their best congressional recruits for the cycle. It'll be very interesting to see how that goes. Well, Vega versus Abigail Spanberger in that new 7th district, we consider a toss-up. Two really key congressional races in Virginia. It'll be really interesting to see kind of how those react, because these are going to be two very, very key seats very early on in the night in the race for the House majority come November 2022.
Yeah, and for folks that aren't familiar with Virginia, everybody knows that, the DC suburbs and exurbs are dominating Virginia politics, but second to them is probably that Virginia Beach, Norfolk, Hampton Roads area, and that is the 2nd biggest military buildup area in the whole world. It's a really unique district. It's probably second only to the DC area in Virginia politics and far as important. So that's one of those congressional districts that matters, because it's probably always going to be a competitive or swing district one way or the other, no matter what, just because of how it's built up. All right, real quick, let's get to some important ones that we haven't touched on because we haven't had you in a couple of weeks because you're this busy guy doing all this fancy stuff now. South Carolina, again, a race that Trump heavily got himself involved in, got a split decision. He clipped off one of his vengeance rod lists, Tom Rice, but Nancy Mace came back. She's kind of a unique personality in the Republican Party. Trump came out against her. She survived it. That sure seems like maybe, and she's another one, she's young. This sure seems like something that probably sets her up for a pretty successful career going forward if she handles it well, because that's a pretty tough acid test for an early part of a GOP congressional career, isn't it?
Absolutely. Obviously, well, so of course, as you mentioned, he did get a split decision. Tom Rice in the 7th district actually got beaten without the need for a runoff by Russell Fry. Fry got 51% of the vote, so he avoided the runoff there against Rice, who was in 2nd place. So Fry will be the congressman in almost certainty in this about Trump +7, 18 seat come 2022. He does get rid of one of his impeachment votes. However, Mace was a bit of a different story. Mace did not vote for impeachment, but she was pretty heavily critical of Trump post January 6th. She did not vote to try and overturn the results in any of the states that came up in the House. So this was a key race. She was going against Katie Arrington. She was the former candidate in the 1st district in 2018. She was the one who lost to Joe Cunningham in that seat. Trump endorsed Arrington. But really what it came down to was that Mace had a pretty overwhelming margin in Charleston County, which is our home base. She won that about 62-37. And then she also won Beaufort, as we dealt with multiple times on the show that night, the issues of making sure which way to pronounce that Beaufort County in South Carolina, which is a county just south of Charleston. It was another pretty heavily populated part of the district. Mace won that about by a margin that she won the race by about 54-46 over Arrington. And that's really what kind of drove her to victory. And that is going to be a big thing. And obviously, Tim Scott is a name that we've heard a lot over the last couple of years. He's confirmed no matter what that 2022 will be his last go around. If Mace is someone who's still around, if Scott becomes someone's vice presidential nominee, or if he just up and retires in 2028, Mace is someone who's certainly coming from that Charleston area and that coastal area, could certainly potentially become South Carolina's next senator and first female senator. It's definitely a possibility now. It doesn't seem like Trump seems interested in going after a post this year. He actually, one of the few ones who he's endorsing against, who he congratulated on his new Truth Social site in the post race of that election there. So it doesn't seem like there's going to be energy from Trump world to go after her past this point. So it'll be very interesting to kind of see what continues to go on after this.
I got the answer for that one, because South Carolina is, how you doing, President Joe Biden? Really, really, really important. If you want to be president, you basically have to win South Carolina for either party. It's probably the one state that both parties have it, probably 1, 2, or 3 on the thing. You don't want to tick off the South Carolina voters if you have any aspirations, whatever, in 2024. That's what that was about. And even Trump, who can really go off the handle and not do very good strategery wise, even he realized, like, okay, we better not tick off her voting base if we want anything to happen in the state of South Carolina. Speaking of which, by the way, the governor's race, you mentioned Joe Cunningham. It looks like it's going to be him and Henry McMaster's. How's that going to shake out?
South Carolina is a state that is, just because of the way its population and its voting base work, it's a relatively inelastic state. This is a state that's gone around between like 10 to 13 points towards Republicans in recent years. It's pretty much stabilized at that point. It's one of those inelastic states, and that's a word that's tad overused, but I think it actually describes South Carolina statewide pretty good. We doubt that McMaster will have any issue here. Cunningham obviously may have some slight bigger appeal than maybe another candidate would in that coastal area of the suburbs that might knock down the margin a point or two, but this is still a red wave year. McMaster's not an unpopular governor by any stretch of the word. I think this will be a pretty quick, pretty solid victory for McMaster, I think is the right way to put it. That's for sure. As we kind of get into that race here, when it comes down to it, it's not really a race that we're going to be keeping an eye on at this point.
The rumor is Joe Cunningham knows he's not going to win this, but this lets him build up a campaign chest and tread water, because like you said, there's the expectation that Scott's going to be coming out and there's going to be an open Senate seat. But if he loses this, that's a couple L's in a row. Is that good strategy on his part? Is this probably going to be his last go around and somebody else rise up? Or do you think that strategy pays off where he can tread water and then go after that Senate seat? That's what he really probably covets.
I think, I never think back-to-back losses is a good thing in politics. Never thought it's a good thing. Obviously wave babies, kind of like Cunningham is, we've seen this before with Republican wave babies and with Democratic wave babies, which are candidates who win a House seat that was pretty decently Republican, or I should say towards the opposite party when they win it in a midterm year. They then proceed to lose it usually narrowly by 2 to 4 points in the actual presidential year. Then that's basically what happened to Cunningham in that regard. And, that is, they do these races where they try and go run a statewide race, again, usually in a midterm, potentially against their party. And sometimes it's for their party and it pays off. But in a year that's against their party, it usually rarely pays off. I don't think this is a move that'll help Cunningham kind of stay in sights after this race is done. I don't think it's going to help him very much.
Let's project ahead a little bit. There's other states, of course, and we'll talk about them in due course. I want to talk about Arizona, August 2nd. This is going to be all sorts of ugly. It's getting, you thought it would maybe ease up a little bit. It actually seems to be, the stupid seems to be accelerating in these races. There's, of course, the Senate race, there's the governor race, and we know what's going on inside of Arizona. It's been ground zero for all the election nonsense, mess, and conspiracy theories. We've got active investigations going on. We've got lawsuits going on. It is a big old hot mess. And you've got some really questionable candidates who may actually win some nominations here. How do we parse out Arizona? Because this looks like a dumpster fire from a distance.
A dumpster fire is probably the best way to describe Arizona, quite honestly. The Arizona Republican Party, just because of the way it is and how we look at it, has been kind of become a mess over the last couple of years. Kelly Ward, a former firebrand state senator who was trying to primary John McCain in 2016, took over the party apparatus as chairwoman in 2018. It has kind of been a downhill slide since then.
Can you repeat that real quick? Because people told me, well, they're just giving her a state seat to get her to be quiet and go away. I'm like, no, that really matters. So I hate to say I told you so, but when that happened, you can go check my Twitter feed. I got pushback. People are like, no, they're giving her that to get her to shut up and go away quietly and placate her. I'm like, no. This is bad. You're going to burn the whole party down, letting her in charge of that. I feel vindicated there, buddy.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's absolutely the case. State party apparatuses are incredibly important, especially when the nationwide party apparatus does not seem interested in getting involved in these races. Statewide party apparatuses are important, and Ward is a nut job, and she has kind of let the cuckoos take over the hen house. So, it has become a big issue here as the Arizona Republican Party seems more attached to the fringes as Arizona has become a purplish state. That's become a real issue, that's for sure. And, you're looking at it here that it's going to be very, very interesting to see kind of how we go here. Obviously, Kari Lake and technically Blake Masters, even though the endorsement he got from President Trump was more of a Mark Brnovich slapdown than a true endorsement of Masters. If you really look at that statement he put up, Kari Lake is obviously the danger candidate here. Really from that governor's race, Karen Taylor Robson, a businesswoman from the area, from the Maricopa area, is her main challenger at this point. This is a race that's gotten really, really nasty in the last month in that governor's primary between these two women. Now Lake is actually being hit hard here as kind of this the issue around gay rights and specifically transgender individuals has really come up again, especially as we've seen issues with drag queens and kind of their role. That some people have brought them up in society, that's for sure. Understandable pushback, I think, that's for sure. But, you're kind of looking at it here. And there is a recent attack that Lake has been friends with a very well-known Arizona drag queen back when she was a newscaster. And these photos and these Instagram posts of Lake basically praising her have come up now as an attack. And apparently there's been some slight on-the-ground rumors that it's working. Obviously, the attacks against Lake is that she is a fraud, and obviously someone who voted for Obama in 2012, donated to Obama in 2012. There are even signs up in Arizona that put Kari Lake next to President Obama's face and say, "I voted for Obama in 2012." And that we'll see if that attack works in Arizona. This is a race that's just going to be very, very interesting to see kind of how this all pulls out in about a month and a half on August 2nd. And like we said, this is a race that still has time to develop because that's just how it's going to be in this race. The race has a lot of money in it, and there's going to be a lot of time for this race to still kind of flesh itself out as we get closer to that August 2nd primary date.
Does sitting U.S. Senator Mark Kelly just kind of try to glide above all this and ride this out? It kind of feels like that's where this is going.
That does kind of feel like where this is going. And obviously Kelly, who has been a money printer in terms of fundraising ever since he got involved, has the war chest to potentially do so. So it'll be very interesting to kind of see how that response is as well when the time comes.
All right. Speaking of unsuitable for office, let's go over to the show me state real quick in the time we got going. Roy Blunt, of course, is retiring. That's a big hole in the Republican caucus. We'll talk about that some other time. He's one of those guys didn't get a lot of national push, but he had a lot of pull in the rooms. So Roy Blunt is retiring. Eric Greitens. My God, where to even start with this? Of all the unsuitable candidates for office, he is absolutely top of the list. I don't trust any of the polling out of Missouri right now because this is such a race with the dynamics, but just talk about it real quick. There's a lot of history here. Josh Hawley is, of course, the other sitting U.S. Senator. He actually, as Attorney General, pushed the recommendation that got Greitens to resign. It was a quote unquote deal. Let's not get into that. But there's a lot of history here. There's a lot of mess in here. Where do we even start to parse out Missouri?
Well, I think just to parse it out here is that Eric Greitens is, like you said, very unsuitable for office. This is a guy who has pretty solid accusations of domestic violence against him. This is a guy who also has what seems to be pretty solid accusations of rape against him. And this is a guy who could legitimately, we've talked about this before. We talked about this possibility with Roy Moore in that Alabama 2017 special. This is a guy who could legitimately find himself kicked out of the Senate if he is elected senator, just based on the potential crimes he has committed. So, Greitens is totally unfit for office. There is been no, theoretically magical Trump endorsement here yet. There's been a lot of talk, Vicky Hartzler, who's a congressman from Missouri's 4th district, and Eric Schmidt, who is the current Attorney General of Missouri, which, as Josh Hawley showed, seems to be a beneficial stepping stone if you want to become a senator right now. Greitens has shown to have a very, very slight polling lead right now, usually hovering around 25%. There's been a lot of calls of Billy Long, another Missouri congressman, is in right now, polling around 8%. There's been a lot of calls for Long to drop out and to endorse one of Hartzler or Schmidt, so that way one of those two can truly grab some momentum, trying to jump above Greitens here. But it would be undeniable that he would be someone who could potentially put Missouri in play in a red year, and would just be an all-around mess for the Republican Party. I mean, this guy's a legitimately bad human being, what seems to be a legitimately disgusting human being. And the recent ad he put out about rhino hunting, the RINO, the idea of Republicans are in name only, which Greitens likes to point a lot of fingers at, as he tried to knock, as the ad showed him busting down with a shotgun a person's door that theoretically could have been a rhino, which was a pretty disgusting ad all in general. So, like I said, this guy's a mess. It would be really awful if this guy was a Republican nominee for a Senate seat in Missouri. This is just in general, a very bad human being. And I really hope that he collapses here in these upcoming weeks before we get to Missouri's primary.
Yeah, real quick, we only got a couple minutes left here, but I want to touch on it. Florida doesn't have their primary until August 23rd, but we've had a lot of Florida news. All of a sudden, of course, Ron DeSantis is all over the media right now. He's running for re-election. Charlie Crist, who was, a Republican and an independent, now a Democrat, because he, has to be in elected office in some form or fashion in his own mind. We've seen some polling. We saw a poll this past week that I think is a garbage poll that showed Charlie Crist up by a couple points. I don't buy that one for a second. However, a lot of people watching this one with an eye going forward. So the governor's race, and then of course Marco Rubio is also up for re-election against Val Demings. Just those two races real quick in the 2 minutes or so we got left.
Yeah. So Charlie Crist versus Ron DeSantis kind of seems to be the path we're going down right now. Obviously, the Florida Democratic primary has to go through right now between Crist and current Ag Commissioner Nikki Fried. But, DeSantis versus Crist, Florida's been a tightly contested state, but Crist has a lot of wins pushing back against him. Democrats do not seem at all interested in investing in Florida by any means this election cycle, which is going to be a real problem for them. Either Crist or, basically certain Democratic nominee for Senate against Marco Rubio, Val Demings. And again, you have to deal with the Rubio factor. This is a guy who's pretty constantly overperforming the state of Florida. He seems pretty well set to do it again in 2022. But, this is kind of just the way it goes right now. I think the Senate is, like we said, we have it rated as likely Republican in that governor's race on Election Daily. We're pretty decently confident in his re-election. At this point, obviously, it's certainly not a sure thing. Florida is a weird state with weird people. And I love those weird people, that's for sure. They always hold a special place in our heart, but you never know how they're going to act in these elections. But the fact is also that DeSantis is a governor who's above water, especially in a year that's going for his party. It's pretty rare to see those guys fall off and lose in these type of years. So it's a race that most people, most analysts are pretty decently confident that DeSantis will win re-election this year, even if it's against Crist.
Yeah, I think you will. And our news media friends seem absolutely committed to trying to make him president. It'll be interesting to watch. I'm talking about the people that oppose him, by the way, who just love to govern. It's going to be interesting watching them going forward. All right, Joe Szymanski, as always, just a big old information sandwich. You're the man. We appreciate you so much. Let folks know where they can follow Election Daily. You guys, pretty much all your Tuesday nights from now till 2024 are spoken for, so let them know about that. And also your social media, my friends, so they can continue to follow you and the other folks over at Elections Daily.
Yeah, so you can follow Elections Daily at elections_daily on Twitter. We also have our YouTube, just Elections Daily on Twitter. You'll see it both on Twitter and YouTube. That's where we stream our Tuesday night election night coverage, as well as our Friday night podcast, Elections Weekly. That's me, our editor-in-chief, Eric Cunningham, and fellow contributors and heads of items, Dylan Brown, and Kraz Grinitz. So catch us there both ways if you're interested in hearing more from not just me and my big mouth, but also more a little bit diverse opinions from our other staff members. Like I said, every Tuesday election night and every Friday night, no matter if there's an election or not, you'll see us live for our elections weekly. So catch us on there. Hopefully you can also catch me personally on my personal Twitter at Joseph Szymanski. That's SCYMANSKI. And it's always a pleasure to come on the Heard Tell and talk to you, Andrew.
Yeah, and those three guys, it's not quite left, right, center ideologically, but it's pretty darn close. Very balanced. They got progressive views, they got some conservative views, a lot of down the middle information they hash out. It's a good program, good folks. Make sure to check it out. Joe Szymanski, always appreciate it. We're going to have you a very busy boy on the show the next couple of years, my friend, because you do great work. Appreciate you.
Appreciate you, Andrew. Thank you very much.
Take care, sir.
All the music on Heard Tell is provided under a Creative Content license from monstercat.com.